So I just had to get this off my chest because I was super surprised. Lazerbeak returns in one of these Rescue Bots Academy episodes. Okay, so I didn't believe it at first. Someone on Tumblr asked me to explain it, and if there are two Lazerbeaks now in a line, like there are two Grimlocks. First I was like, do you mean robots in disguise? Because I had not realized more Rescue Bots Academy episodes had come out. But then I did a search and was like, wait, what? So I went to watch the episode with a little dread of what they would do. Explanation: Rescue Bots Academy is a aligned continuity show, and it is what is still keeping Aligned alive. They can put anything in right now that changes even Transformers Prime. It's also way more of a kids show than Rescue Bots, so now you see my fear. But then it actually turned out to be a good episode and expanded on what I talked about before in my video about Lazerbeak's individuality. This episode also includes one of my favorite topics. Are Decepticons truly evil, or are there experiences like those of the Autobots, with both sides finding fault with the other? So the students find a ship falling apart with a life signal inside. For context, the show is about Cybertronians in school for rescue work. They follow a life signal and pull up this tiny cassette tape. When I saw that, I was like, uh-oh. How do you explain that when you look at Transformers Prime and Robots in Disguise? But this show does take place after Robots in Disguise, so I could start pulling up excuses, which start getting supported at the end. So yay. So they bring Lazerbeak back and ask how a Cybertronian could get so small, how could it get this alternate mode? Perceptor tells them that Cybertronians can basically shrink their cells and bodies to become more compact, and I was like, oh my god, they just confirmed what I was talking about in the mass change discussion. I think they also just justified predicating an RC right there. And Lazerbeak is a special Cybertronian, so it wasn't a big deal that he can interact with technology. You might ask, why does he look so different? But I don't think we should really worry about that. I mean, he could have removed some metal to get smaller, got a new look. But this show also says this guy and this guy are the same, so don't worry too much because you can either justify the change, or accept shows have their own styles. So Lazerbeak is bleeding heavily and tries to escape, and while the Autobots chase them, they talk about if they should really help a Decepticon who might destroy the Academy. Whirl actually doesn't know what being a Decepticon means, and Hotshot, our classic asshole, rants about how evil they are. Hoist points out that they were never taught to not help a bot in need. If you watch the show, you get used to these arguments because they're just the Cybertronian equivalent of children in school, except for one of them who's older but chose to study rescue work. It's fine that Whirl doesn't understand because she's probably only a few years old, and Hotshot would have a biased viewpoint. Lazerbeak gets outside and flies off, and they realize that he will eventually lose so much energon that he'll fall into a hibernation-like state. Not bad, Rescue Bots Academy, not bad, since that stasis lock stuff was actually mentioned before in a line like in Robots in Disguise. I thought I would be angry at a line at this point, but this is actually working out. And then the best part is that the students decide, screw it, let the Decepticon freeze up and never trouble anyone again. Wedge snaps, dude. He snaps, and for an awesome reason.
What if it then destroys the Academy?
It will destroy the Academy. That's what Decepticons do.
I don't care what the rest of you do. I'm going to help it.
What? Why would you, of all bots, help a dirty Decepticon?
Because I am a Decepticon.
Wedge knows that it isn't fair to label Decepticons as evil, even though he knows being an Autobot is better now. This was exciting when Wedge exploded, then ran off to help Lazerbeak because Aligned has not shown such a scene in its cartoons before. They actually set up the Autobots as bullshitters and called it out. They rectified it with the students changing their mind and helping Lazerbeak. At the end, Perceptor gives us some key information about Lazerbeak that gives him more character. So Lazerbeak actually was not considered a war criminal. Lazerbeak wears the Decepticon symbol, but he is just living life like a neutral bot. If Soundwave is absent, this could totally imply that Soundwave was imprisoned for crimes, but Lazerbeak was let go. Lazerbeak on that ship might have been doing work with other bots and living his own life. We talked about before that Lazerbeak is actually not a Cybertronian animal, but an intelligent life form. Throughout the episode, they used the inanimate animalistic pronoun it, just as the Autobots in Transformers Prime did. They started with gender-neutral they, like, oh, a Cybertronian life signal, they need our help. But then it changed when they grew confused about what Lazerbeak was. Even Wedge called the Decepticon it. However, once they band together and help him, everyone has switched to saying he. Even Perceptor knew better. And then it turns out Lazerbeak squawking is actually words that Perceptor can translate. That is a cool eye-opening moment because you might have been thinking, oh, he's squawking so he's just a Cybertronian bird. Now this actually reminds me of a super specific line in Exodus, when it mentioned that Soundwave's minicon spoke in a sort of compressed code when sending him messages. This could mean so much, that Lazerbeak and Transformers Prime could speak to Soundwave, but might have been silent and never squawking because he was under the same vow as Soundwave. What if Soundwave abandoning his vow and Robots in Disguise allowed Lazerbeak to speak in this language again? Ultimately, I was very excited by Wedge's outburst and Lazerbeak being his own person. It is fun to imagine Lazerbeak doing his own thing unrelated to Soundwave. It is also an interesting thought, hey, is it illegal to call yourself a Decepticon after the war? I mean, the war is over, but bots are still calling themselves Autobots instead of just Cybertronians. Is it illegal to wear the Decepticon symbol? Or can prideful bots announce, yeah, I was a Decepticon and I'm not ashamed. I accept the end of the war, but we were never wrong.
Decepticons are bad guys. Optimus Prime fought against them. We have to find this thing. That's crazy. Decepticons don't count as anyone. Who knows what a Decepticon might do? They're horrible.
It'll soon go into a state of hibernation.
Good. Problem solved. That's what Decepticons do.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.